Everybody, Charles at GMATNinja here. Hour number 10 of our nonstop 24-hour GMAT crash course, benefiting Ukrainian refugees. We are here with a really special guest today. This is a session I've wanted to do for a very long time. One of my favorite people, Dr. Jenny Forman, mindfulness coach, psychologist, knows a ton about the works of the human brain, knows a ton about test anxiety. And if you've been watching the whole time here, talked a bunch about what are the most common things we see people struggle with, what are the most common destroyers of GMAT scores. It's not math, it's not funny symbols, it's not grammar, it's test day performance has gone wrong. I'd say about 60% of GMAT students I encounter have some sort of test anxiety. We've got a full hour with Dr. Jenny to talk about what are the roots of it, where does it come from, what you can do about it. So Jenny, thank you so much for coming on with us.
Thank you, Charles.
All right, so I guess the first thing I kind of want to start with is just kind of that general, when we talk about test anxiety. So as a longtime tutor, and I think this is true that we've got, other people who are practitioners in this area, we'll look at students and say, hey, you're performing much worse on your real test than your practice test. There's something going on, and very likely there's anxiety there. And one of the things we run into all the time is that students will say, well, wait, I didn't feel anxious on the test. I felt fine. So one of the kind of discussions we get into is what exactly is test anxiety? And when we say that there's something that's kind of hurting somebody's performance on a test, what does that really mean? If they're not feeling anxious, how can that be anxiety? So how would you think about that kind of from a professional standpoint?
Well, certainly a lot of things can be going on there. I mean, it is certainly possible that they don't have anxiety. Maybe they have something else going on. But it's also possible that sometimes people don't recognize what anxiety is. So can you hear me okay? I'm just checking the volume. Okay.
Yeah, you're perfect.
Yeah. So, anxiety can manifest in many different ways for many different people. And primarily, anxiety manifests in the body, immediately in the body. And so whenever we have some sort of a trigger where there's some sense of fear or nervousness, our body will immediately respond to that. So what happens is that when we sense danger or when we sense fear, what happens is that our sympathetic nervous system activates, and we start to have a rise in body temperature. Our heart rate starts beating faster. We often start breathing more shallowly, and so forth. And also our digestive system gets put onto hold a bit. And so these are all kind of signals in the body that can indicate that, in fact, our nervous system is being activated, our sympathetic nervous system is aroused, and our stress level is starting to come up. And a lot of times we might not even notice that, especially if we're caught in our head. Like we're thinking a lot about the test, maybe we're going over problems in our head, or we're worrying about something in particular. So we might even miss these signals in our body that this is happening. And if we miss it or we resist it or avoid it, what can happen is that our body will continue to run with it and sense that, in fact, there is danger. And our nervous system will continue to activate, and our stress arousal will continue to go up and up. And then what happens is that we get to a point sometimes where we're at what's called a stress threshold. And when we go over that stress threshold, let's say something happens where something unexpected. So for example, maybe there's something wrong with the testing situation, or we realize we're running out of time, or something is going on. We could easily put ourselves over that stress threshold. And then that's when our thinking brain goes offline. And we have problems accessing our frontal lobe, which is where we use, like I said, our thinking brain, which is where our working memory lies, our ability to access our memory and that type of thing. And so we can have a tendency to blank out. We can't think clearly. We get fuzzy. And we might not even realize that we're actually under kind of acute stress. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So I think we see that in our students all the time, right? And I think plenty of the people who are watching right now kind of feel that all the time, right? Where it's like all of a sudden their brain goes blank. They might not feel anxious, but they kind of feel their brain going offline. And some of the people that are watching right now have been here with us for 9+ hours and are there out of exhaustion. But a lot of them also just work their butts off and they're stressed about doing well on this test and their brains just go offline sometimes because of all the stress. Now, how can you be better? How can people be better about recognizing that? And what can they do about it? So how do you get people to recognize, first of all, that brain going offline is something that they can address, that it's a form of stress response? And second, what should they do when they start to notice it?
Yeah, so, well, and of course there are many answers to that, but in the context of mindfulness meditation, which is what I work with GMAT students on, is mindfulness. So even though I'm a psychologist, I'm a licensed psychologist in California, I don't work under my license when I work with GMAT students. So I work as purely a mindfulness meditation teacher and coach. And so we work with utilizing mindfulness strategies, exercises, and meditation to help us recognize what is going on in our bodies moment to moment. So mindfulness, and I don't know, a lot of people might not know what mindfulness really is, but mindfulness is really the moment to moment awareness of what is going on in our internal world. So what is our felt sense of the experience? What are our body sensations? What are our thoughts? What are our feelings? And so, and it's also an acceptance of a neutral observation and acceptance of what's happening in the moment. So we're not judging what's happening. We're not resisting it. We're not trying to interpret it or analyze it. We're just witnessing it. And so there's this receptiveness that allows us to see accurately, clearly what's happening. And then, in addition to the receptive part, there's also the active part, which is that we're able to then respond to ourselves in a skillful way. So one of those things might be to just allow and accept it to be there, to have some discomfort with what's happening in the moment. And when we can allow and we can build that capacity for discomfort, then we don't get so thrown off, or our stress doesn't go up so much when we do feel nervous and we are in a high pressure situation taking a GMAT test, right? That is high performance, high pressure. So we should be nervous to some extent, and that's okay. But if we resist that, or that triggers memories of poor performance or whatever, then again, our stress level can go up. So one of the skillful ways is to just see if we can allow whatever discomfort is there to be there. And we do that by practicing mindfulness exercises and mindfulness meditations. And then another thing, is that sometimes we can't allow it to be there. Sometimes we're on the verge of a panic attack, right? And we just can't allow ourselves to feel that sort of acute stress. And so then we can choose some strategies to help us deactivate, down-regulate our nervous system, so that now we're in a place where our stress arousal is lower and we can work with it. So things like deep breathing, like 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Deep breathing signals our parasympathetic nervous system, the nervous system that helps us regulate. So deep breathing is one strategy to do that. Another strategy is to put our attention in our feet, where the contact point of where our feet and the ground are. So the sense that we're grounded, we're moving our energy down, we're grounding, we're anchoring, we're centering ourselves. Because what happens with panic and acute anxiety is that our energy starts going up and we want it to go down. So noticing the contact points, the bottom of your feet, the sensations in your feet, putting your attention there, putting your attention on the back of your legs, even where the contact point is between the leg and the chair, feeling that the chair is supporting you. There's nothing you have to do. It is supporting you. You are supported. Putting your attention in your hands, where your hands meet your lap, and feeling the sensations in your hands, or even your breath. Although I will say, if you're nervous, putting your attention on your breath can sometimes be a problem for people. So these anchoring strategies, these breathing strategies are examples of ways that we can support ourselves when we're starting to get too activated, our nervous system and our stress arousal is starting to go up too much.
So what I think I'm hearing is, so when our stress starts to build, let's say in a testing situation, or we're studying for a test, getting more and more stressed out, if we ignore that stress, it just makes it worse. And what you're suggesting is that what we need to learn to do is listen to it, pay attention to it, and develop active strategies that don't need to be time consuming to start kind of reducing that arousal.
That's right.
Excellent. So if anybody has questions for Dr. Jenny, please punch them into the chat. One of the questions we've gotten so far is, well, can't I just increase my stress tolerance in some way? Is that a possibility? So instead of sort of bringing my stress levels down, can I just get better at handling more stress?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer to that is it depends, So yes, in some ways we can increase our capacity for, like you say, stress arousal, for discomfort. If you're really sensitive to anxiety and you get thrown by it easily, then for certain, a good strategy would be to be with the discomfort of being nervous, of being anxious, of having your I'm not used to having the chat come up of having, your temperature rise, your heartbeat faster, and to just allow it to be there, to build that capacity for discomfort can be really important. However, I would also say that oftentimes, when we talk about stress or chronic stress, there might be many things going on in our lives that are contributing to stress. We might be stressed by our jobs, our family, the pandemic, the situation in the Ukraine, the news. I mean, all sorts of things can come at us and can build up that chronic, what we would call chronic stress. So we might sort of be at this high level of stress arousal continuously. And if we're not able to recover, if we're not able to down-regulate our nervous system and it's always up like this, then it doesn't take too much for us to just then go over that stress threshold. And in a high performance situation, that will do it. So if we're already up here, then instead of trying to increase our capacity for more stress, probably what we would want to do is recover, nurture ourselves, so that our stress generally goes down.
So we've got a very kind of pragmatic type A, lot of stuff in people's lives. So pretty much anybody watching here, they're trying to go for top MBA programs. They've got full-time jobs, kind of, fairly early in their careers in most cases. So a lot of folks here aren't working 40 hours, they're working 50 or 60. They're trying to take this test, they're studying, 10, 15, 20 hours a week for it. They've got all those pressures of being young adults, and they, whatever the social pressures are, and you've got to do extracurricular stuff to get yourself into business school, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, so we can kind of go down the road of saying, like, hey, I want to be more mindful and I want to have less stress in my life and I want to be more present in my life. well, how do I find time for that if I am insanely busy and I do crazy things like 24-hour marathon live stream sessions? What are the quick things I can do? So as I study and I'm trying to cram my 2 hours of studying into my evening, how can I make progress with my anxiety if I really can't afford to spend more than, let's say, a few minutes a day on it?
Yeah. So, again, I think the thing with mindfulness is that we are attuning to ourselves. We're attuning to our moment to moment experience in the present. And so, if as we learn to move our attention outward, inward, then we're better able to make a choice. What is needed, in these moments? And sometimes when we start attuning more and more, we recognize that, instead of going out with these friends, I maybe what I really need is to go to bed early tonight. Maybe I need to get some more sleep. Maybe I shouldn't drink tonight. Whatever the case is, it could be that, or it could just be a sense that maybe, I have some free time. I have a moment. I'm getting tired. So instead of picking up my phone and like scrolling through social media or the news or something, maybe what I need is to give my eyes a rest, is to move my attention inward, to pause and to take a few deep breaths and to see if I can down regulate. And maybe what I need is more spaciousness. Maybe I need to look outside and look at the trees or walk outside and smell the fresh air and open my senses so I can create more spaciousness in my body. So there's many ways of responding to ourselves, but first we have to attune to ourselves. So if we're not attuning and we're not recognizing what's going on internally, where our mind state is, where our emotional state is, what our physical state is, then it's really hard to know what to do unless we first attune.
I had a great question from a couple folks asking, so when you're suffering from chronic stress, what's the best way to recover from that? Because we're kind of talking about these things that are, part of mindfulness that we might integrate into our daily life. Be conscious of maybe I shouldn't be doom scrolling on the Ukraine news every night. Maybe I should just close my eyes or go do something else or go for a walk. But once your stress gets chronic and you've been stressed out and exhausted for months, what's the best way to deal with that? Do you take a vacation? Is there something where you can kind of make that change en masse, or is it just a matter of kind of a bunch of little moments that you integrate in your life?
And it's different for different people. But there's certainly, if you're already at a state of chronic stress and you're just like right below your stress threshold, then really what it might take is, you might need to take a vacation. You might need to take an entire weekend of resting and, sleeping and eating nutritious foods and going for walks in nature. And you might need that. But the trick, with mindfulness, or the strategy with mindfulness, is that we don't get to that place where we're just right below our stress threshold. So with mindfulness, there are mindfulness moments or mindfulness exercises that we can incorporate throughout our day, which only take, a moment of time. And then there's formal meditation practice, which is the longer sitting, for at least 10 minutes, up to however long you want. And when we do formal meditation practice, typically what we would do is we would be sitting in silence and stillness, and we'd be watching what's going on internally. But these days, a lot of people find that listening to apps, meditation apps, not necessarily mindfulness, but guided meditation, is helpful for them, and they can start to gain a sense of relaxation and down regulation with these apps or videos. There's many videos, teachers online as well.
One of the questions we got kind of early on was sort of this idea that, okay, there are people, so anybody who's watching a live stream for 24 hours straight, probably is taking the GMAT super seriously. It's important to you. You're studying a ton. That's most of the people who are watching this kind of thing. And somebody made the comment earlier, and I can point to a lot of examples of that of people I know who kind of went into the test and they didn't really study a lot. They didn't really care. And they really kind of outperformed what their ability levels were. And we've got all these stories about people who are just like, I just took it for practice, or they were done, they applied and they took it later. Like, I'll just take it one more time for the heck of it. And all of a sudden their score goes up by 50 points. What is that? Why is it that it feels like the harder, it's not true for everybody, that it can feel like the harder you try and the more you care, the worse you do. And then all of us have kind of watched these friends that just kind of, slouch into the test and crush it. Right. Psychologically, how is that possible?
Well, it's a good question. And of course, again, it's different for different people, why that's the case, why that phenomenon happens. But primarily, it's probably because, we would have to look and see what we're telling ourselves. What are our beliefs about this test? What are our thoughts? What are our thought patterns around it? So, for example, when I work with GMAT students sometimes, they put a lot of pressure on themselves. The meaning behind this is so great for them. They've invested so much and the stakes are very high. And so, and even as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, wow, it's just those thoughts and the thought patterns and the beliefs around how they're holding this test can create anxiety, and it can create this, what I call anxiety cycle as well. Because what happens is that these triggers come in, like, I have to do well, my life will be over if I don't do well, I will never get into the right school, my career will not advance, I will disappoint myself, I'll disappoint everybody else, those type of things. Or it could be something like, I'm not good enough, I have to prove that I'm good enough, this is where I'm going to prove these sort of thoughts, these kind of negative thoughts will come in as triggers, and that will activate again our fear, our sympathetic nervous system, which it starts to create this cycle then of more fear-based thoughts, fear-based actions, which then reinforces that we are in danger, that we are in a threat, and that then our stress goes up even more. So it's again this cycle.
So how do we break the cycle? So if and I've seen some really kind of interesting comments that are things we hear from our students all the time, people I meet through the forum, that'll say, oh, well, my parents are putting all this pressure on me, or yeah, but if I don't get into a good business school, like, I won't be taking care of, my future family the way I'd like to. I've heard that that phrase dozens of times, right? And so that pressure mounts, they study too much, they don't sleep enough, don't get their exercise, right? We see that feedback cycle all the time. And I know that plenty of people who are watching right now have experienced that. Now, how do you arrest it? So is there a way, is there some sort of wholesale change that you can make to your mindset? So there's the things that can kind of reduce your stress, where you're more mindful in your daily life. But is there a way that we need to change our mindsets? And should we care less about the test? Should we tell ourselves that? Would that help? What else can we do to kind of stop that cycle, that feedback loop of putting more pressure on ourselves, not performing well, feeling worse about ourselves?
Well, so there's a lot of answers to that question. And there might be some investigation about, is that true? Is this belief true? Is it really true? And, potentially to reframe it in a way that is more supportive of oneself, that's more compassionate, that you are doing your very best, you're putting in as much effort as you can put in, and you're going to, perform the best that you can, and, and that's all you can do. So there's many ways of working with it. There can be, if there's some underlying belief about yourself and about who you are, that is something around that you have to be perfect, or that you can't fail, or whatever the case is. These are things that are a little bit, the GMAT is kind of the symbol here, but it's a little bit of a bigger problem probably that you're experiencing in other parts of your life as well that you might want to investigate more, either, just through your own sort of discovery, or maybe with the help of a therapist or something like that. But having said that, just working with the thoughts, working with these core beliefs is hard to do. So going back again, if we can't work with the beliefs, or we're not going to change the beliefs or the thought patterns, or we don't know how to change that, we don't know how to do that on our own, we're not going to go into therapy, we don't have time, whatever the case is, we can again go back to our body. So again, if we're having these thoughts, these thought patterns, we can recognize, first of all, that we're having these thought patterns, these beliefs of what we're telling ourselves, and notice, how does that manifest in our body when we tell ourselves, I have to perform, I have to get this score. If I don't get this score, this and this is going to happen, this catastrophe. What happens internally? How do we feel? What are the signals that our body gives us when we have that thought? So if we start to recognize how our body is reacting to these pressure thoughts and beliefs, then we can, in some ways, instead work with the body. Okay, well, I'm starting to contract. I notice that I get a lump in my throat. I'm feeling tightness in my chest. So let's see, I wonder, so maybe now what I can do is some progressive muscle relaxation. I can see if I can relax and soften the areas around my throat. See if I can soften the areas around my eyes. My jaw's feeling really tight. Maybe I can soften the areas in my mouth or my jaw, my lips. See if I can bring some softness, some spaciousness, some relaxation in my body. And oftentimes just working with the body will then affect our mind.
And I had a great question earlier. Can exercise work as a form of mindfulness? Like, as you really focus on the exercises you're doing? I've had people bring up yoga specifically, but also had somebody, I think, mentioned weight training and just kind of the things we think of as sort of normal, quote unquote, gym exercise. Can that be part of your mindfulness practice to bring you back in your body and help alleviate that stress?
Absolutely. I mean, mindfulness, you can practice mindfulness at any moment in time, and certainly any sort of movement. You can practice mindfulness. It's so for example, if you were to go on a mindfulness retreat, you would probably experience mindful walking. So just noticing the sensations of movement and feeling your feet against the earth. Also, if you go outside and you exercise outside, then what I encourage people to do is to open their senses. So what we tend to do is like, okay, we got to go for a walk. Okay, we've got half an hour. It's time. Let's go. We go out, power walk, get our exercise in. And that's fine. That's good. That can be really good. If what you really need, though, is more spaciousness and more relaxation, then I encourage people to really open your senses when you're outside. So really see what's going on. See the light in the trees as the light's coming through. Smell. What do you smell? Can you smell the flowers? And it's spring here in the United States. Can you smell the trees and the grass? And open your ears and hear the birds. Maybe you hear children laughing. Feel the wind, the touch against your skin.
Wait, Jenny, so you're saying that I should leave this room sometimes? I had a good question pop up from Dubsy, who's making all kinds of really kind of interesting and cool and insightful comments and bits of advice here. What about daily affirmations? And then we had kind of a follow-up to that from Vubar, which I thought was cool. Part of his journaling. So can you talk about those things? Again, what I think is helpful is, are there certain things you'd like to see people doing every day, or things that people can think about integrating like that, where it's like, no, I'm going to sit down for, I don't know, a minute, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, do affirmations, do journaling. Can you talk more about those sorts of tools and whether you think they sort of help with the mindfulness and the stress responses?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Journaling, affirmations, not everybody loves to write or to journal. Affirmations don't work for everybody. But if it works for you, if you find it really helpful to have an affirmation, one thing that people sometimes do is when they're meditating or when they're in stillness, if there's a phrase that really resonates with them and that creates spaciousness or creates confidence or creates whatever the case is that you might practice breathing in as you breathe in, watching your breath and breathing in that affirmation, and then breathing out what you don't want, which would be negative thoughts or like negative future fantasies or whatever catastrophes are going to happen. And then breathing in that affirmation or that positive thought.
One other question we had. So can anxiety ever be good? So
Yes.
We had somebody who weighed in earlier and said, yeah, I was more nervous for my third test and it went better. So when is anxiety good or stress good?
That's a good question. So yeah, anxiety to some degree is good in a high performance situation. So there's what's called the optimal stress level. And if you think about just stress, like down here, you're asleep. Okay. You're totally relaxed. You're at the beach. You're practically asleep. Can you see this? And then slowly your anxiety comes. Can you get that, Charles? And then probably somewhere right in the middle, this is your stress threshold, is kind of where you want to be when you're taking the GMAT. Because what happens, again, to keep going back to this neurophysiology of anxiety, is that when we activate our sympathetic nervous system, things start to contract, right? And our energies start to come in so that we can focus, right? We're getting ready to activate to whatever's happening. Like in our brain, we're thinking there's something we need to fight or flee, but really we're just gathering our focus, right? So having some level of activation is important. We don't want to be taking the test when we're so relaxed that we're like almost asleep, or like we just came from the beach or something. We want to have some degree of nervousness and anxiety for sure.
Interesting question from Domenico, my long lost Italian brother. How could we use this to help other people or students in our community at large? Does being more mindful and kind of practicing mindfulness, do you think that helps people to connect better with other people?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So mindfulness. So mindfulness it's about attuning to ourselves and our thought, like I said, our body, our thoughts, our feelings, but it's also about attuning to those around us and the world, the environment around us, and having a skillful, effective, nurturing response to others and to the environment as well as to ourselves. So absolutely. And if we're more attuned to ourselves, if you think about if you're in a conflict with somebody, and if you've ever had the moment where instead of just reacting, that you paused and you maybe just took a few deep breaths and then responded, rather than just immediately, automatically, habitually said whatever was on your mind, or just tried to relieve the discomfort that was inside of you because you were uncomfortable with what this person was saying to you. But you allowed yourself to be in the discomfort, to pause, to notice what was going on internally. And then when you got yourself down regulated to a certain level, then you can respond in a skillful way, effective way.
So it's mindfulness as tools for self-regulation in all contexts. The test taking is one of them, obviously, the one that we're all concerned with here. But I think it's that in general, if that can give you that moment to pause and be thoughtful about what you're doing, it makes everything in your life better.
That's right. Yes. And so the pause, it's the sacred pause, is really what we often refer to it as just that moment. There's sometimes doctors will go through trainings, mindfulness training, and one of the things that I've learned that's often taught for doctors is that of taking a moment of mindfulness, of pausing before they open the door into the room where the patient is. So instead of just keep rushing around like they do and opening doors and so forth, is that transition into the room, it's a pause, it's an inward reflection, it's a taking a deep breath, centering oneself, and then going in.
Okay, these questions are starting to get juicy. So I like this because this is something that comes up a ton. How to remove the fear of the unknown. And that can mean a lot of things, and I'm not quite sure what you meant by that, Abhishek. But that's a thing that's really common, right? It's like, I'm afraid of what will happen behind that door. What can you do about that?
Yeah. Well, again, anytime you're talking about a fear of the unknown, a fear of anything, maybe you're afraid of heights, maybe whatever the case is the more that we are familiar with our triggers, and how our body and mind react to these triggers of stress, of danger, of threat, of which could be for some people the unknown, which is for many people the unknown to some degree. So the more that we can be familiar with the triggers, then we can sometimes in some ways prepare ourselves for what's going to happen. Right. So the unknown is kind of big. I mean, we could be talking about death. We could be talking about the unknown of how you're going to perform on this GMAT test. But regardless, it's becoming comfortable with what's going on internally whenever we're faced with a situation that is maybe novel or that is unknown, is that the more that we can build the capacity to be with discomfort, and if discomfort is the unknown, can we allow ourselves to be in the discomfort, in the unknown, without having to resist it, to avoid it, to flee it, or to get caught up in it and start perseverating? Oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? Okay, let me think about the 30,000 different scenarios that could actually happen, and just start obsessing and obsessing and obsessing and obsessing and trying to control the unknown. So instead of controlling it or resisting it, let's see, can we just be with this discomfort? Can we allow it to be here? And the more that we practice that, again, this is all just about practice. I mean, we're talking a lot of conceptual ideas here, but it all comes down to practice. The more we practice with being in the unknown, the more we gain confidence in ourselves to be able to handle situations that we're not prepared for.
And I think that's a perfect segue to another question from Vubar. And apologies for any mispronunciations, everybody. How often would you recommend practicing mindfulness? So is that something you're trying to build into everything? So you're doing dishes. So we talked about things like exercise, where it's fairly obvious to see how you might exercise, again, even if it's not yoga or something we associate with mindfulness, that you could say do weight training or walk in a way that's mindful. But what about things like doing dishes, or as you're just answering GMAT questions, these things in daily life? Like, how do you integrate that? And how often is good? What's the dosage? So the questions we get all the time: how much should I study? How much should I do this? Busy people. How much mindfulness should you be doing? Is it something where once an hour you should be doing something? Is it reminding yourself several times a day? What would you recommend?
Well, as often as you can. But to be honest and to be practical is that, when people are starting out with mindfulness meditation or mindfulness exercises, is that usually you have to schedule it. Because if when I tell people, like, what I want you to do for homework is to do one formal meditation in the morning or somewhere during the day, in the evening, of at least 10 minutes, and then throughout the day to do X, Y, and Z mindfulness exercises, nobody will remember to do that, or they'll kind of remember or do some of it. So you have to schedule it on your phone or on your device or whatever, or however you schedule. Most people schedule things on their phone. Sometimes people have, these little reminders, these little dings or whatever, and it's like ding every hour. Oh, pause. Okay, pause, take a deep breath, bring my attention inward, do some progressive muscle relaxation, see if I can soften the areas of my body. Notice my breath, just watch my breath for 3 breaths. So everybody, right now, just if you're comfortable, close your eyes, and if not, you can cast your gaze downward and just in stillness and silence, just notice your breath for 3 breaths. That's it. And then as you transition out of that moment, seeing if you can just kind of slowly transition and keep some awareness in your body, some internal. So whatever the case is, whatever sort of mindfulness exercise you're doing, it only takes a moment. And if you do it consistently throughout the day, it'll become a habit.
And one of the next questions I was about to put up is, how do you stick with mindfulness, even if the benefits start to stick to it? And I think you just answered that, where it's making a point of having that practice deliberately some amount of the time until you start to build that habit.
That's right. I forget what there's research on how long it takes before something becomes a habit, and it's just lost my mind. I think, do you know what it is, Charles?
No, and I want to say, like, my boss's name, Charles Duhigg, I think wrote a book about it and kind of got into summarizing some of that research on it. And it's a disturbing number, I think, for most of us, right?
Yeah, it's right. But if, of course, if you're just doing this for the GMAT and then this is all you care about, then probably what I would recommend is focusing on, mindfulness exercises, mindfulness practices to regulate your nervous system and to stick with mindfulness of the body. It's the first foundation of mindfulness. And honestly, it's the most effective, in my opinion, of working with anxiety. So really focusing on bringing your attention into your body, taking these deep breaths, relaxing, these type of things. If you're interested in generalizing mindfulness to other parts of your life as well, and you have more time and you want that, then it's definitely worth it to invest in a book, Introduction to Mindfulness books, which I unfortunately don't have just with me right now. I didn't think to put them up in the chat or anything, but there's all sorts of introduction to mindfulness books that I recommend with different exercises, or get a mindfulness coach. There's also all sorts of content out there. You can just Google anything and you can learn mindfulness exercises and practices and strategies and concepts and so forth. And then schedule it regularly and see what resonates with you and work with what resonates.
I love this question from Whitney. For people who identify with the faith, what's your advice on incorporating faith into mindfulness? And part of what I find really fascinating about this question is I personally, I think of faith as, in a way, a form of mindfulness. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on kind of how to incorporate faith into that mindfulness and how to blend them more.
Well, many faiths, in fact, I think probably most faiths, have mindfulness exercises that are incorporated into the faiths. I know for certain Buddhism does, because this is where mindfulness came from, is Buddhism. Also, Christianity has, different parts of Christianity has, ways of working with mindfulness. So does the Jewish tradition, Islam. Really, all faith traditions utilize mindfulness, or contemplation is probably the word that's used more often. And I mean, that's kind of a big question. There's many ways of working with faith. It's kind of too general, I think, to really answer that. But I would encourage you to look at your faith and to ask, ask that type of question of what sort of contemplative or mindful exercises or meditations might you use to incorporate your faith. I don't know if that was.
No, that's perfect. And Whitney, if that didn't answer your question, feel free to put in a follow-up, and we'll toss that back in. This is a big one, and Tommy, lots of respect for asking this, because this is something that we see all the time. How do we overcome obsession with negative thoughts? Tons of students have it. It's something we see every day. It's like they kind of go down that road of, well, if I don't do well, then my parents will hate me, and if my parents hate me, I'm not going to get a good business school, and et cetera, right? It's really, really easy to get caught in that loop. How do you beat it? How do you overcome it?
So again, this is a really hard question for me to answer in a short time. It's hard for me to kind of give a soundbite on this because, as a psychologist and as a therapist, how do we overcome obsessions with negative thoughts is kind of a bigger question, because there's a lot that's probably going on. How did these negative thoughts begin? Why do we have these negative thoughts? How are these negative thoughts serving us? And even kind of trying to break it down a little bit more and see, like, are these negative thoughts serving us? If they are, how do they serve us? Where did they originate from? Are these thoughts that I want to continue? An antidote to any sort of judgment, self-criticism is self-compassion. And so seeing if we can be mindful of what it is, first of all, we're telling ourselves, what sort of judgment, I shouldn't, this is wrong, this is bad, this is good, like black and white thinking, and noticing how many times we are using this kind of language on ourselves, and seeing if we can reframe it, or seeing if we can bring a sense of compassion and kindness to ourselves. And, the limitations that we all have for being humans, as well as the suffering that we all have to endure, just being alive. So just seeing if we can bring in some softness and some compassion and kindness, and reframing these black and white judgments, should, shouldn't, good, bad, right, wrong, into something that's actually more evolved, quite honestly, into like, well, I'm going to try my best, I'm going to effort as much as I can, and I'm going to, be kind towards myself, however you would want somebody to treat you is honestly how you should be treating yourself.
And we're starting to get to the top of the hour here. Two last questions that I think are really kind of these brass tacks, pragmatic kind of things. I really like this one. So thinking about anxiety, like, what are the things that we shouldn't be doing? What are the things that make anxiety worse? We've been kind of talking about a lot of the, kind of the psychological roots, right? Like maybe I've got a lot of kind of self-doubt, or I feel pressure from my family, or I start having negative thoughts. There's ways to take ourselves and our body to make it better. But what are the things that we might not think about that we shouldn't be doing? So exercise, we actually brought a personal trainer on a few hours ago. Exercise, I think, makes it better in general, within reason. I suppose you could torture yourself. What about caffeine? What about other things that we do that we kind of just are part of daily life we don't think about, that make our stress work, elevate our cortisol? Are there things that we should be thinking of consciously to avoid doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So caffeine is a stimulant, and anxiety is a stimulant. So if you're already hyped up and you're anxious and your adrenaline is going, and there's too much adrenaline being produced, and then you pour a bunch of caffeine on that, then you're now kind of in some ways overtaxing your adrenaline system, and you are making your body sort of compensate in some ways, and it can become harder to then kind of regulate, which isn't true for everybody, honestly. I mean, as I'm saying that, I'm recognizing that everybody has different physiology. And for some people, caffeine actually helps them to relax. But in general, it can heighten people up. Yeah. So again, if it's sort of common sense, if scrolling through the news makes you anxious and you're already anxious and stressed, then don't do it. If talking to somebody a family member or a friend or a coworker or something who continually adds stress and negativity into your life, then see if you can maybe try to at least notice the triggers. If you can't avoid the person, see if you can say, okay, this person adds stress into my life. I'm going into a conversation with them. Just first of all, prepare yourself. This is a trigger for me, right? So there's some practical things we can do, but again, it all comes back to a tuning in. What are these triggers for us? What are the triggers? What are the things that we notice amp us up, makes us more anxious, makes us more upset? And then either avoiding those or lessening those, or at least going into the situation with mindful intention. My intention is to remain calm. My intention is to keep my focus in my body, to keep myself grounded, whatever the case may be.
So probably our last question of the hour. So Evan's one of the guys here at GMAT Club, does a lot of debriefs with students that have gotten good scores and goes and interviews them on YouTube here. Question that comes up quite a bit is, how would you handle stress during the test in the middle of the section? How do you not allow yourself to spin out of control? One of the things we talk about quite a bit with our students is reset routines. I have a great story about one of our tutors. This guy's been doing this for 16, 17 years. Went and took the test a couple years back, freaked out, couldn't make any sense of the reading comprehension passage. He's one of the best writers I know. And he physically pushed himself back from the table, closed his eyes, took 3 deep breaths, and then brought himself back in. That's what works for him. Can you say more about what those options are? And remembering, everyone's under time pressure, right? You've got about an hour for the key sections on this test. You can't take 3 minutes. What are the things we can do in 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds, 20 seconds, that can help stop us from spinning out of control in the middle of the exam?
So what I recommend is so what he did essentially was he shut off the external around him, and he brought himself into another space, another situation. And so that's in essence what I'm suggesting, is that instead of bringing your attention out, is bringing your attention in. So notice, like if you're blanking out and you can't even read what's in front of you, you need to stop. Just stop, pause, the sacred pause, bring your attention in, close your eyes, take a couple breaths, feel your heart, see if you can get your heart rate down just a little bit with these deep breaths, deep 4-count breaths. Pause. Okay, I'm starting to come down. Okay, now I can maybe open my eyes and see if I can focus. If I can't focus still, then you're going to have to go back into your body. I mean, it's not going to help you to sit there and like tell yourself focus, fight the right. You've got to do something. So bringing your attention. That's why I think for me, what was helpful when I had to take my license, I had to take a couple licensing tests, is I would just quickly check in with myself throughout the test. Where am I? Where am I? How's my heart? Where's my heart? Just kind of doing a few deep breaths. And it only takes a couple seconds to do that.
Excellent. All right. So Jenny, where do people find you? Tell us a little bit about what you do and what coaching looks like. If somebody wants to get better at mindfulness, help reduce their anxiety, give us a quick snapshot of what that process typically looks like, and where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so you can find me. You can email me. My website is www.jennyformanphd.com, and you can email me on my website, or you can email me at, should I write this in the chat or should I?
I think Evan's put it in there. So
is it in there? Okay.
Yeah, it's in there somewhere. So we'll repost it.
So the mindfulness sessions for people that I work with a GMAT range. I've worked with people at GMAT for 1 session. I've worked with people who've come from GMAT for 10 sessions, who've wanted to really integrate mindfulness into their lives. And the way that the mindfulness sessions work is that I try to work with specifically what you're interested in. So as you've been hearing all these questions and ways that anxiety manifests in different people and ways they're struggling with it, sometimes it's panic in the test, sometimes it's negative thought patterns, sometimes it's, problems focusing, whatever the case is. I try to work specifically with the area of need. And I structure the session so they're very structured. It's not this kind of free form as we're doing now. There's a talk on mindfulness of whatever it is you're interested in, a bit of a talk, and then exercises and practices that we do together, questions and answers, and then homework, very specific homework. And I provide a summary of what we've talked about and the homework, and then checking in throughout the week as well is, I think, important part of it. And I also can provide resources, other resources, books and videos and other things as well. So yeah, I try to tailor the sessions very specifically to people and what it is their challenges and what their time constraints are in terms of when they're taking the test, as well as their, financial resources and all sorts of things. So I just try to work individually.
Outstanding. Jenny, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you.
This is so much more fun than what we're going to do next, which is a bunch more number properties and remainders and divisibility. So thank you so much for the breath of fresh air for an hour. Anybody wants to get in touch, you can do through Jenny's website. You can also contact me anytime. I'll put you in touch with her. All right. Thank you so much, Jenny. And we've survived 10 hours of the marathon. We'll see you at the next one.